to now go to the Gongchik. Back to chapter 1. So we temporarily was looking at some of the lines from chapter 6, bearing in mind again that the order of these chapters seem to have been flexible at the early transmission of Gongchik, that the order of the chapters seem to have been rather flexible, fluid. So I think this is also a point for us to remember, for us to not get too rigid, even as we're studying the Gongchik. Not being too rigid doesn't mean in our heads unclear. Not being too rigid is, you can be very clear about, all the different points raised, and very clear about even like remembering, memorizing all the Vajra statements. That's of course very good. That kind of clarity, always good. But we should not become fundamentalist, in the way we learn the Gongchik, internalize the Gongchik. Internalizing the Gongchik is very important. Not so easy, of course, but it's very important to internalize the Gongchik. As I shared before, Khenchen Rinpoche said, there are some very good, in his opinion, Khenpos who can teach the Gongchik very well. But they are still, I think, so it can teach very well, especially teaching it from a philosophical standpoint. And in some ways, reading, for example, Nimanangwa, which is 400 years after the when the Gongchik was first produced. As I pointed out, Nimanangwa 400 years later was dealing with many other concerns and issues that have come up since the time of Gongchik, since Jigten Sungren's time. And so, so one of the consequences of that is that Nimanangwa is dealing with, for example, scholastic. That's sometimes I interchange the word scholastic and philosophical. Of course, if you are experts in these fields, you will say, well, those are different terms. But for our purposes, I use this interchangeably. So Nimanangwa is dealing with like scholastic challenges of the Gongchik. And those are important challenges to respond, kind of in the spirit of intellectual rigor, which is a quality encouraged in Tibetan Buddhism, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama will always say, this is the legacy of the Nalanda tradition in India, emphasizing intellectual rigor. So, however, we still should understand that as for Kyoba Rinpoche himself, probably scholastic intellectual rigor was secondary to him. Clear thinking, of course, primary, important. But to what degree scholastic intellectual rigor is really important? Let's just say, I think, in my opinion, for Kyoba Rinpoche, it's secondary. I'm not saying that for you it needs to be secondary, but for you to appreciate Gongchik, you have to take that point. You have to understand that point. Otherwise, you will be raising, I think, unnecessary questions and then get yourself wrapped up in confusion. Because as I said before, it's like if you, like, let's say tennis is, no, not let's say, but tennis is a type of sport. Golf is a type of sport. But they're both sports, right? But how you play it, is very different. The rules are different. So the scholastic intellectual demands that the Nalanda tradition is famous for, that kind of scholastic intellectual demands is one set of rules. Then you have, Milarepa, for example, and many of his disciples, of course, Rechungpa, and then Gampopa later, and then continuing with Jigten Sungden. Before Milarepa, you have all these Mahasiddhas in India. So this is not a Tibetan thing. These Mahasiddhas in India. Names such as Metripa, Tilopa, these individuals. Many of these individuals combined both, as in they often started in the Nalanda system and then somehow they left. Saraha, another very important figure. So that tradition of the Mahasiddhas, I would say, also became the basis for what is known in China as Chan or Zen, that Bodhidharma supposedly brought to China. That is also, I would say, following in the Mahasiddha tradition, which does not contradict Nalanda. But we have to recognize that their style, their flavor can be different. So again, I'm not saying that, just because you're studying Gongchik, you have to change. You have to change your style. But I am saying, like, for you to appreciate Gongchik, the root verses of Gongchik and the Dorshema and the Rinjangma. Nimanangwa, 400 years later, is beginning to discuss the Gongchik in scholastic terms. Although Sobish points out, although the Nimanangwa has the burden of needing to address questions raised by the scholastic intellectual tradition, it still preserves the spirit of the Gongchik, which is the spirit of the early Kagyu masters. Later Kagyu masters also joined the emphasis of this intellectual rigor of the Nalanda style. So some of the greatest Kagyu scholars and masters. And when we say scholars, it's not a term of insult, okay? But such as the third Karmapa, fifth Karmapa, eighth Karmapa, a number of the Sharmapas, sixth Sharmapa, for example, fourth Sharmapa, and then in Drupakagyu, Pema Karpo. These are all, very learned, and they learn the scholastic style as well. For Drigong Kagyu, it is said that one of the first people to kind of do that and do that really well is actually Rigzin Chodra, the author of Nimanangwa, the main commentary that we're reading. The first Chongsang Rinpoche. In a way, you could say, like Drigong maybe never really got into the scholastic mode until much later. Yeah, Drigong started around 1200s, but Drigong didn't really get into that until sorry, I'm sending a message because Kim, I noticed, is not with us today. I was concerned because, she will be the first to sign on even before I sign on. But there was some confusion, and so she thought we were not meeting today. But in any case, she was doing practice. So I'm saying, oh, good, just practice. Don't worry about it. When Kim, who like without fail every class gets there before I get there, and she's not there, I'm like, oh wait, let me send a message to make sure she's okay. So Rigzin Chodra, is really, I would say, the first, maybe one of the first within the Drigong family that really got into this kind of rigorous intellectual scholastic mode. Of course, there were others, but maybe they were not famous, so we don't know them. I'm sure there were Drigong people who went off to study because there were strong institutes of training in central Tibet during that time. At that time, the lineage and the sectarian stuff is not that strong. People, went back and forth, studied at different places. You see from the biography of the early throne holders, routinely they would go to somewhere else to study and train and come back and then go somewhere else. And when you look at the names of these places, you can tell that they are different centers of learning. Some of them are centers for learning Vajrayana or Tantric theory and commentaries of Tantras. Some centers of learning were famous for like Vinaya studies. It's like these famous colleges, in different parts of central Tibet. Another college specialized in studying logic and debate. And then another, monastery / college is famous for studying like the Kadampa style. So people were quite moving around, and studying, even though their primary affiliation or identity might be this lineage or that lineage, but there's a lot of moving around and studying like this. But Chodra is really, I think, the first of the famous ones within Drigong that also learn this scholastic way. So his commentary tend to address those issues more clearly, more specifically, more directly. So that's important, to remember as we now turn to statement 11 in chapter 1. So here it says, the Buddha's instructions that teach mind only reveal the middle way. as I said, to me, this specific statement appearing at this point seems a little bit strange. But of course, I know rather superficial, the Gongchik. So there might be some deeper connection, which maybe together we can uncover that. But on the surface, just looking, it feels a little bit odd. But nonetheless, it's okay. Again, the collection here is not intended, to be like an essay, a extended essay, where everything is in the right place and everything is edited carefully. But it's not, right? These are just individual statements put together. So anyway, this statement, the Buddha's instructions that teach mind only reveal the middle way. So some background here is that these terms, right, mind only and middle way, mind only is the English translation of Chitta Matra in Sanskrit, and middle way is Madhyamaka. So Chitta Matra and Madhyamaka, commonly, if you hear these terms, they are often referring to the two major philosophical approaches current among Mahayana Buddhists at Nalanda, or in that curriculum of studies in Nalanda. It is said that if you look at all the different philosophical traditions found within the Buddhist family, first you can divide them into the so-called Hinayana and the so-called Mahayana. Then within the Hinayana, although there are many different traditions, as many as a common grouping calls them the 18 chapters, the 18 chapters, the 18 Nikayas. And these are 18 different so-called Hinayana groups. But they say, if you look at these 18 Nikayas, their philosophical positions can be divided generally into two. What is known as the Sautrantika and the Vaibhashika. Sautrantika literally are those who follow the sutras. This is a term that these people gave to themselves, as in they say, we follow the sutra. What they mean by we follow the sutras, of course, other Buddhists will say, yeah, we follow the sutras too. So, but what they mean when they say we follow the sutras is, what they're saying is, we do not accept the Abhidharma. The Abhidharma is a third collection. In the earliest Buddhist history, there were two collections of the Buddha's teachings, one known as the Sutra collection, the Sutra Pitaka, and one known as the Vinaya Pitaka. Abhidharma Pitaka is something that came later. But, most of us know the three Pitakas, Tripitaka, three Pitakas. But in early Buddhism, there were some who say, no. The Abhidharma may have very interesting, very helpful material, but we do not accept them as authoritative. So the sutra, those who say we are followers of sutra, what they are actually saying is, we only consider the sutra, and of course the Vinaya. The Vinaya was never challenged. But the Abhidharma was a little, not a little, but kind of controversial. And Abhidharma is not one book, okay? Different traditions have different books that they call Abhidharma. Abhidharma means higher Dharma. And they tend to be philosophical texts. tradition says Buddha taught the Abhidharma. But if you look at the Abhidharma, I think it's hard to say that literally Buddha Shakyamuni taught Abhidharma. Abhidharma is more like compilations of, different points, different arguments, put together. But nonetheless, tradition says, Buddha Shakyamuni taught Abhidharma in the heavens, the heaven of the 33. At one time in the life of Buddha, he was not seen in the human realm for several months. And then it is said that he went to the heaven of the 33 to teach his mother and all the other gods, specifically to them. Then later tradition says, what did he teach? He taught the Abhidharma when he is there. And then only later the Abhidharma became available in the human realm. Of course, with that, it became controversial. Some Buddhists say, no, we don't accept the Abhidharma to be authoritative in the way that the Sutra Vinaya is authoritative. In fact, you can say that the Abhidharma in a way represents the crystallization of differences that were emerging in the early Buddhist community. The early Buddhist community were united very loosely, I would say, united around the figure of the founder. Once the founder passed away, there were different centers of focus led by different disciples of the historical Buddha. And slowly from there, differences became more and more obvious. And the various Abhidharma collections would represent these differences. And so now just lesson in Buddhist history. Any questions before I go forward? Maybe today we won't even really look at this statement, but this is some background that is necessary. Please ask some questions so that I know this is not easy stuff necessarily, but I like history, so for me it's easy.
Would the Lalita Vistara be considered in either of those classifications?
Lalita Vistara falls under Sutra, but that's already much later Sutra. Historically, if you ask historians, of course, for Mahayana Buddhists, we say, oh, Buddha Shakyamuni taught it. Yeah. Now I'm wearing two different hats, the Buddhist Lama hat, but I'm also wearing the modern academic, hat. Also showing you that, well, yes, many of the texts that I consider to be profound, amazing, everything came later. I will admit it. From a historical point of view, came later. I have no problem with that. But some people are very upset, when they hear that. And some of the people who are upset are against these later texts, and some of them are followers of these later texts. They both don't like to hear that, oh, this came later.
In my opinion, you have to consider later texts. Otherwise, you're saying that there were no enlightened writers after the old times.
Yeah, but some people, like, we need to go back to the original. Yeah, sure. Yeah, but anyway. Any questions first about this early period and different Nikayas, 18 Nikayas? So these 18 Nikayas are these chapters, as in, like, if you have a national organization, chapters in the sense of that, local chapters, not like book chapters, but same meaning. Yeah. You have a national organization, then you have the local chapter. So there is, you could say, a national kind of Buddhist family, all comes from, spiritually descended from Buddha Shakyamuni, right? But local chapters have formed. So in this early period, it is said that there were 18 local chapters. But even when you look at the list of the 18 chapters, the names are different. So we know more than 18. But 18 became a common way of referring to this early period. So some of them are, some of the names are Sarvastivada, with Bhajavadan, Mahasangika, and Pudgalavadan, and so on and so forth. Vibhajavadan, from Vibhajavadan, the modern Theravadan, Vibhajavada is the early family or source whereby Theravada developed from. So Theravada is the southern subchapter of the Vibhajavada up in the north. And the north was the heartland of Buddhism, because Buddha lived in the north. So the northern groups, there were 18. Then one of the northern groups called the Vibhajavadins, that tradition got brought to South India and then eventually to Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, Theravada took roots, what we know now as Theravada. So these 18, then later, the Mahayana emerged at a later point. And till today, secular historians looking at the history of Indian Buddhism do not have a very clear picture because there's not enough evidence exactly how the Mahayana emerged. As early as they say, maybe 2nd century BC. As early as that, they can trace back. And so from there, kind of sometimes scholars call proto-Mahayana texts began to appear as early as 2nd century BC. But around 2nd century BC is also when we have evidence of the first writing down of the texts by followers of the early 18 chapters. So around the time the followers of the 18 chapters were writing down the Vinaya Pitaka, the Sutra Pitaka, and the Abhidharma Pitaka, was also when Mahayana or Proto-Mahayana texts started to circulate. So the origins are unclear and ambiguous. One very good Indian historian of Indian Buddhism say that there are 4 possible sources of the emergence of Mahayana. One is from within the 18 chapters. There were people from within the 18 chapters who began to produce these Mahayana texts. Then some probably came from forest monks. Monks were meditating in the forest, that they began to have access in their minds to these texts that are called Mahayana. And so then they wrote them down. So several sources. And another source they say is that in these centers of Buddhism, in the city, which is focused on stupas that have relics of the Buddha, And there also, there were communities of Buddhists that were active in those areas. And they too were revealing Mahayana texts. Just like, the 18 chapters say the Abhidharma was revealed. First went to, right, heaven of 33. And then now we have it here among the human realm. In the same way that the so-called Hinayana was producing Abhidharma texts, a less organized phenomena was happening where Mahayana texts were turning up. So later traditions say, like Nagarjuna, for example, received many of these Mahayana texts from the Nagas. The Nagas are these serpent spirit beings. And later, many of the Vajrayana texts were said to be received from the realm of the Yakshas, because Vajrapani had kept all these teachings. Vajrapani is the lord of the Yakshas. And he's also called the lord of the secrets. So these traditions are common, it's not just some like, sort of Theravada extremists, I would say fanatics these days will say, these Mahayana things were made up. Well, everything made up, anyway. But they don't mean it in that way. They mean like, some sinister, making up in order to mislead people, And you say, why? Well, they say, well, look at this story. It came from the Naga world. Well, your own Abhidharma Pitaka came from the heaven of 33. So just because, this other collection came from the Naga realm doesn't immediately invalidate the text, because your Abhidharma collection came from the heaven of the 33. And then the Vajrayana, some say came, like Kalachakra came from Shambhala, So there are traditions like this, yeah. Anyway, now fast forward to Nalanda. So what Nalanda represents is the height of the development of Buddhist education, Buddhist culture, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist sciences, Buddhist arts, everything. Because at that time, the kings of India supported Buddhism. So there's a lot of state support. And the culture of India was pervasively Buddhist. Hinduism continued, of course, but like the intellectual vigor, the royalty, all the educated people, they were all kind of attracted to Buddhism. And they all supported Buddhism. So Nalanda became this like Oxford or Cambridge of ancient India. So the Buddhist tradition of Tibet following Nalanda will talk about the 5 major sciences and the 5 minor sciences, of which Dharma is one of the 5 major. Then there's logic, grammar. These are considered all areas of study at Nalanda. So very learned, very respected, very respectable. So Nalanda then, in the Nalanda curriculum of study, it kind of simplifies the diversity and sometimes bewildering differences among the Buddhist family of all the different Abhidharmas, different Mahayana texts, different so on and so forth, right? They simplify it by saying, generally there are 4 major traditions of philosophical difference. 2 belong to the early 18 schools, and 2 belong to the Mahayana community. Now, by the time of Nalanda, the main form of Buddhism is Mahayana in India. The 18 schools, I could be wrong, but I think you could say more or less the 18 schools don't exist as independent schools in a very strong way, or maybe on their way out already. Definitely not the main tradition anymore, the 18 schools. By Nalanda, the heyday of Nalanda, when Nalanda becomes this great institution, majority of Buddhist India are basically Mahayana in orientation. So then two belonging to Mahayana. The two that belongs to Mahayana, one is called Chittamatra and one is called Madhyamaka. So this statement, seemingly at least, we'll see, is talking about what is the relationship between Chittamatra and Madhyamaka. So here it says, the Buddha's instructions that teach Chittamatra reveal the Madhyamaka. I can say what Kyoba Rinpoche here is doing is he is using, I would say, maybe I'm wrong, let's see. He is using the term Chittamatra and Madhyamaka not to refer to these philosophical traditions. So not Chittamatra with a capital C, if Indians wrote with capital letters, and not Madhyamaka with a capital M. But Chittamatra with a small c and Madhyamaka with a small m, meaning he's not talking about philosophical traditions. He is in fact reminding us, I would say, that before this way of thinking, oh, there is Madhyamaka, there is Chittamatra, and these are the two main schools, philosophical traditions in Mahayana. Before that, there are texts that teach the topic of Chittamatra. There are sutras that teach the topic of how everything is mind. And there are sutras that teach how everything's nature is empty. Those texts, those teachings are called Madhyamaka. Those texts and teachings that emphasize the nature of the mind and how all appearances are simply mind, those are called Chittamatra. So I want to say then, my understanding is that Kyoba Rinpoche is again, exactly his style, not interested in philosophical intellectual debates. And so he makes this rather provocative statement. Why? Because at his time in Tibet, the Nalanda tradition has already been established, and there are centers of learning. And according to the Nalanda framework, Buddha's Dharma, philosophically speaking, consists of 4 levels. Starting with the most basic is Sautrantika. Then more profound is Vaibhashika. Then more profound is Chittamatra. And more profound is Madhyamaka. 1, 2, 3, 4. Less profound, most profound. But in the 12th century, there was still debates regarding these two, Chittamatra and Madhyamaka. Is Madhyamaka the most profound? Perhaps Chittamatra is equally profound. Or perhaps Chittamatra even more profound. There were some still, debates going on. And it's really in the context of those debates, It's not being settled yet, but now I can say it's settled. And when Chodra wrote, settled, which is Chittamatra is here, Madhyamaka is up here. Mind only is here. Middle way is here. But during Kyopa's time, still people were debating. So he knows, people are debating and using these two terms. Then deliberately he says, the Buddha's instructions. So here's important. He wants to point back to more than the labels Chittamatra, Madhyamaka referring to philosophical traditions with their own intellectual commitments and their intellectual rigor. More basic than that is there are Buddha's instructions that teach about the topic of mind only. And those instructions reveal what? Those instructions illuminate, clarify what? They clarify the middle way. Again, he's reminding people there is a more important definition of Madhyamaka, middle way, than the particular philosophical tradition that we now label Madhyamaka. Which is true. Even in Theravada, Buddhist way is called the middle way. You can see how Kyopa is trying to yank people out of getting too involved in those debates and forgetting, first and foremost, how we should relate to the Dharma as devices and tools to transform ourselves by removing, eradicating, right, afflictive emotions. So he takes it back to, he begins, he says, the Buddha's instructions that teach mind only reveal the middle way. Now, questions or comments? You should ask, yeah? Not easy. Hello? Anybody? Profoundly understood or profoundly silenced by confusion? Some of you studied these things, so speak now. Maybe those in Asheville have not studied these things because I deliberately have not exposed you to these. Tibet house people are well educated in this kind of material.
Okay, I will.
Pressure is on.
For me, it's still the same debate, internal debate for me.
Mm-hmm.
So mind only is third turning, right?
Okay, you see, that's the thing. This is what the scholastic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, Kyopa is trying to do something else.
Okay. And middle way would be scholastically second turning.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah. So all this first, second, third turning. Yes. And this chapter, it is about the turnings. Yeah.
so to me, the second turning does not contradict the third in the vision of emptiness.
Uh-huh.
But to some, it is either you have this vision of emptiness that substitutes the third turning vision, and to
Not
the
so much substitute. Even those who say that the emptiness is final, they say it has the final say, but it accepts, what is said in mind only, but mind only is not the final say.
okay. To me, it's still the same. For me, this is my issue with these two turnings. To me, the teachings on emptiness are not substitutable. That's how I interpret them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the third turning is I don't know how to say this. Antonio, please help me. We've talked about this, Antonio.
He's not willing to be brought into this. He's sitting like a Buddha statue, just.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yes.
I was well, actually, I was thinking something about. So I wasn't paying attention to Jasmine, but I guess if you continue.
Yeah, you go ahead and say what you want to say, or what you can say. You really don't want to say, we're forcing you to say, so I know that.
Well, I was just thinking about what you have, like teachings, and then you have religion and culture, and then you have philosophy of religion.
Yes.
And like a philosophy of religion trying to explain religion and culture, or maybe like rationalizing or looking for a structure.
Yes, looking for structure, mapping things out, yes.
And Jigten Sunmun's trying to taking us back to teachings.
Yes, rather than traditions.
Than translations.
Traditions, yes. Okay. He's taking us back to teachings. Don't get fixated on traditions. That's a key point of what he's saying here. He's deliberately using terms that are loaded for his context. Imagine, people, even within his community, they went to learn somewhere else and they come back, they're very excited. Oh yes, this is superior to this. Oh, third turning is better than second turning. No, second turning just eliminates third turning. All those debates. Then imagine he comes and he says, Chitta Matra illuminates Madhyamaka. Then he walks back into his room. It's like he throws a, bomb, hurls a bomb into this, and just explodes what they are all getting excited over. Because he's reminding us. First of all, these are teachings. To the degree that when they get turned into traditions, they can help us see more clearly, good. But when they turn into traditions, what happens when something turns into tradition? just anybody can talk about this. Yeah. What do you think? When something turns into tradition, what are some of the kind of potential negatives?
Original meaning is lost.
Possibly original meaning is lost. What else?
Gets fixed.
Gets
And
fixed.
people
What
don't
else?
question it.
The symbol substitutes for the reality.
Symbol becomes, yeah, the menu become the meal.
Words are washed down.
Yeah, or words become more and more rigid.
Well, meaning is lost, and you just perform.
Yes,
Out,
because it's tied now to identity. I am a Madhyamaka. You are a Chittamatrin. You are a follower of Chittamatrin. I'm a follower of Madhyamaka. And so identity then now comes in. Right? Then the original intention of giving these teachings is lost. You know, maybe the meaning is not even lost, but the intention. You know, we forget, hey, why did the Buddha teach this? The Buddha did not teach this so that, you know, 3 is a sexy number, so I need to come up with 3 things. You know, he didn't do it this way, you know. He just taught. Then later, when people try to organize it neatly into this, this, and that, because it is overwhelming, of course. So people try to provide some structure, reasonable. But when structures become, in of themselves, a basis of focus, that's when, you know, Jigten Sumgön will say, I think you are wasting your time. And so, so here, of course, we have to also keep in mind, he's not just doing this, you can say, maybe one point he's making is you're wasting your time, but this statement here is not just about wasting your time. There is also something important being communicated by telling us that mind only was taught to reveal, to clarify the middle way. So you have to hear these vocabulary in a very different way from what you're used to. Second turning, third turning, first turning. You know, and poor first turning, nobody is concerned about it. And in a way, Kyoba Rinpoche turns this upside down by saying, many places you'll see, he'll say, actually first turning is the most important. He says, first turning is the basis of everything else. And first turning is, you know, cause and effect. According to you guys. I don't think he will say first turning is cause and effect. His disciples have to use that kind of language because his disciples are talking to other people and other people are using that kind of identifier. First turning is about cause and effect. Second turning is about emptiness. Third turning is about mind only. Yeah? But I think Kyoba Rinpoche himself will say, no. All so-called turnings, of which there are 3 in this context, they all have all those topics. Then, of course, some people would criticize that and say, fuzzy thinking. Yes. Then why even talk about 3? And I think Kyoba Rinpoche would be like, well, then don't talk about 3. But you guys want to talk about 3 because you found scriptures talking about 3. I think to kind of, I'm biased, of course, you know, to help Not that he needs my help, but if I was like cheering on the sidelines when he said this, I would say, yeah, sutras talk about 3 turnings, but also a lot of sutras never talked about whatever turning. You know, in comparison to how many sutras did not talk about first turning, second turning, third turning, you know, the vocabulary. In fact, I think only 3 or 4 sutras use the vocabulary of first turning, second turning, third turning. But suddenly all the efforts, you know, all the focus is on figuring out which turning is more real. Later, you know, in this chapter, actually chapter 6, Kyoba Rinpoche says, the 3 grades, you know, great middle way, great middle way, great seal, Mahamudra, and great perfection. He says all 3 obscure the truth. He says all 3 obscure the reality. In a way, that's kind of shocking. You know, you say, wait, even Great Seal, even Mahamudra? I thought you were a Mahamudra guy. And you say, yeah, but even Mahamudra can and will obscure. Why? Problem is us. If we don't know how to apply them, they obscure. So Chodra here, he says, this is explained by way of 3 reasons. You see his very scholarly, very organized way of talking about things, which is, you know, helpful. Yeah, but also don't become too rigid. Yeah. So he says, this is explained by 3 reasons. It is determined through 1, the instructions, meaning the teachings of the Buddha. 2, scholars who commented on the Buddha's intentions, meaning those who wrote commentaries on the Buddha's teachings. And 3, more immediately within the context of Drigong, the teachings of Lord Parmodrupa, meaning he's saying, you know, how Jigten Samgun can make this statement. Jigten Samgun is making it by what he understood the Buddha's teachings say, what he understood those who came after the Buddha were saying, and what he understood his teacher to be saying, his own teacher, his own main teacher to be saying. So 3. So 1, Chodra then gives examples. The Lankavatara teaches, for example, by realizing phenomena to be only the mind and removing every notion of outer substantial reality, one turns away from the thought outer phenomena. This path is the middle way. So here, what Chodra has done is to take an important sutra that all those involved in this debate, they will not dispute the authority of this sutra called the Lankavatara. Now, of course, you know, those of you who know these debates will say, but this Lankavatara belongs to the 3rd turning. So then for some, you know, immediately they say, well, the 3rd turning, I already say that is not final. So I cannot accept this as final. You can see how when you are in that mode, immediately you will say, oh, well, this statement, yeah, it's wonderful. There's this chord, but this chord needs to be interpreted according to the demands of the second turning is ultimate. But here, what Chodra is trying to show is this. He says, is to go back to teachings and not get stuck in traditions. So he says, so what is this teaching? This teaching is when we realize that phenomena, meaning what we consider outer doesn't mean, only like things that are outside. Then you think, oh, my kidney, my heart, my tendons, that's inner. No, that's also outer. I don't know if you ever think like that, but sometimes I do, like, oh, that's inner. But no, that's not inner. That's already outer. Then you say, oh, my mind. My mind is also outer. Outer means whatever is other than what you think of as self. Whatever that you think of is outer already. Because I think of already subject, object. So whatever is objectified, that's what outer is, okay? So here, Lankavatara says, by realizing that phenomena, meaning whatever is objectified, to be only the mind, and removing every notion, removing any and all notions of outer substantial reality, removing any and all thoughts that there is substantial reality to that which we objectify. When you are able to do that, then you turn away from the thought of the concept of outer phenomena. And this is the middle way. As in, and this is the Buddhist way. Middle way here means Buddhist way. But of course, there is a double meaning, double entendre going on here. It also wants to say, in fact, the true meaning of Madhyamaka, even Madhyamaka as a tradition, should be, what does Nagarjuna say? People who say Nagarjuna is the founder of Madhyamaka, what does Nagarjuna say? Nagarjuna says, right? Free from elaboration. So you relinquish all of your conceptual stuff. Relinquish is not fuzzy. Just kind of like, oh, everything is illusion. Relinquish is actually quite specific, like so-called outer phenomena has no hold on you anymore. Have no power over you anymore. Free from elaborations means that. No power over you anymore. You see everything for what it is, which is an appearance. Where does the appearance come from? Comes from? Where does appearance come from? Comes from mind. If you don't have the power of the mind to be aware, then no appearance would arise. And what is mind? Mind is insubstantial. Empty. For those of you who are interested in this, there is a book written by, interested in the philosophy, there's a book written by a Japanese scholar, published many years ago, still good, I think. I was in college when I read this book. He basically wrote about how the so-called mind only and the so-called Madhyamaka, he said, looking, cutting through, he says, don't read any of the Tibetan stuff. I mean, he didn't frame it like that, but basically I would summarize. He says, don't look at any of the Tibetan stuff. Because he says the Tibetan material on these two topics are already moving in one direction. He says, just look at the Indian Sanskrit texts and just look at the evidence of the Indian texts. Then these two groups called Chittamatra and Madhyamaka were basically one same community. They were basically the one same community. They're not two different groups of people. And even like the so-called founders of Chittamatra, according to later Tibetan and later Indian Buddhism, Nalanda tradition, said Asanga, Vasubandhu, these figures, that they were the founders of Chittamatra. In their text, in their own text, they pay homage to Nagarjuna. To them, Nagarjuna is not like the founder of another system. To them, Nagarjuna is the trailblazer for the Mahayana tradition, and everything that Nagarjuna taught, Asanga and Vasubandhu, even as they were, whatever they were teaching, they said, this is in the tradition of Nagarjuna. So this Japanese scholar wrote this book. It's called, I think it's simply called Chittamatra and Madhyamaka. Nagao is his last name, Nagao. Nagao. Very good scholar. Of course, reads Sanskrit, reads Chinese, reads Tibetan. Back in the day when scholars can really read all these languages, and then French, German. I once met a Japanese professor. I didn't really meet him, but in the same space. I was at the cafeteria in the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. He was in line, and he was talking to someone, and someone was saying, sort of curious, asking him how, he learned his English, and his vocabulary. And he said, in all seriousness, he said, Cambridge Dictionary, this thick, when he was much younger, literally, he would memorize page by page. Every time he successfully memorized one page, he tears the page out and literally eats it. And he ate the whole dictionary. Back in the day where scholarship was really serious. Anyway, I digress. So he literally made the dictionary part of his being, both physical and mental. Can you imagine eating a whole Cambridge dictionary? Oh, even with salad dressing, it would be hard to swallow. Chodra, thus one understands all phenomena of samsara and nirvana to be from the very beginning only the mind, Moreover, mind too cannot be established as an identifiable essence, since that mind is also beyond the two extremes of existence and non-existence, and because the sphere of reality endowed with the supreme of all respects, the great middle, is actualized. For example, except for being complete or incomplete, the moon on the third day and the moon of the 15th day are likewise the moon. Whether it's half moon, a sliver of the moon, or full moon, it's still the moon. And since the fruit arises from the sprout, they are likewise the plant. Maitreyanatha says that apart from the mind, there is nothing, that apart from the mind, there is nothing is understood by the proliferating mind. And thereafter, it is also understood that the mind itself does not exist. The intelligent ones who understand that both are non-existent dwell in the sphere of reality that is free from that. In the Mahayana Sutra Lankara. The problem with later traditions, when traditions with a T, those who say, we are Madhyamaka, Madhyamaka matters, Madhyamaka matters. Imagine them going to these Buddhist philosophical protests, Madhyamaka matters, right? They want to say that, the Chittamatra people, the problem with their belief is they believe that everything is mind and mind is real. So for the Madhyamaka people, as those who belong to that tradition, they say, Chittamatra people believe that mind is real. But then if you look at the Chittamatra teachings, such as this quote, because I'm not sure if there are Chittamatra people walking around, there's definitely Madhyamaka people walking around. But if you look at the teachings, the text that is supposedly the Bible of the Chittamatra people, it says here, the intelligent ones who understand that both are non-existent dwell in the sphere of reality that is free from believing that external phenomena is real, free from believing that that which perceive external phenomena is real. Yeah, so what mind only is talking about is, first, you need to understand how all external phenomena is experienced through mind. And therefore, insofar as your experience is concerned, insofar as what you think of as reality, and therefore how you act, body, speech, and mind, towards what you think is real, all of that is concocted by mind. Second step, understand that the mind that concocts all of this is also concocting it interdependently, and therefore mind, the subject, does not have an existence independent of the object, which does not have existence independent of subject, and therefore neither are truly existent. It's useful to step out of the very narrow debates that Madhyamaka is better, Chittamatra is real, this is more true, that is more true. What I just said, right? The relationship between of how perceiving all experiences as concocted, mitigated through, experienced through mind. Mind arises independence of that which is concocted. that they are not like, primary, secondary. They are completely interdependent. Two cards of a card tent. Take one card away, the other falls. They can only stand when they stand equally on each other, subject and object. So what I've said that, right? You already find in the Dhammapada the so-called first turning, the so-called Hinayana. You already find it there. The opening of the Dhammapada already states that. Yeah, the opening of the Dhammapada. My favorite translation, I'm looking for that. So the opening of the Dhammapada, the opening verse, says, all states of being are determined by the heart. Here, the mind, the heart. It is the heart that leads the way, just as the wheel of the ox cart follows the hoof print of the animal that draws it. So suffering will surely follow when we speak or act impulsively from an obscured heart. All states of being are determined by the heart. It is the heart that leads the way, the mind that leads the way. As surely as our shadow never leaves us, so well-being will follow when we speak or act with an unobscured heart, unobscured mind. There you have it. Remove the obscurations. Chodra's second and third point. You can read that yourself, but Sobish's notes go into more details. And there he is, I'm going to go through that together the next time we meet, because he quotes from the Dorshema. And between Dorshema and Rinjangma, as I said, Dorshema is more scholastically inclined. Rinjangma is more practice inclined. And so the way Rinjangma talks about the comments on the Vajra statements, much more concerned with what does this statement mean for a practitioner meditating and training in internalizing the teachings. Dorshema, of course, also focus on that, but has more of a scholastic flavor. And so Sobish provides Dorshema's commentary excerpts from there. On 94, the conclusion, so to say, or the important line, it says, in contrast, but consistent with the previous two Vajra statements, here Jigten Sungön teaches that all these sutras reveal the middle way. From his perspective of a single vehicle, neither a group of sutras nor a wheel can be held to be non-definitive. Differing from other Kagyupas, so even different from other Kagyupas, by that Sobish means later Kagyupas. And differing from what later Kagyupas are going to do with respect to the second or the third wheel, Jigten Sungön does not argue for the designations definitive or in need of further interpretation. So Jigten Sungön is not interested in labeling whether the second is definitive or the third is definitive. He has no interest in that. Later Kagyupas, because later Kagyupas, and in fact not all Kagyupas, but later Kagyupas who were trained in those scholastic intellectual debates, playing by that set of rules, then they have to argue and prove why second is definitive and third is not, or why third is and second is not. Here it says Jiten Simgon doesn't do that. In fact, Jiten Simgon, if anything, if you can imagine like kind of time travel and bring Jiten Simgon to a few hundred years later, then maybe his energy will be spent on saying, but the first turning is definitive also. So you can imagine those two groups going, no, second is, no, third is, no, third is, no, second is, right? Then he comes in and he goes, first is, you know, and everyone in the room will turn and look at him for a moment and probably just ignore him and go back to their talk. It's like, what are you talking about? Oh gosh, this person is completely uninformed of the real debates we're having here, you know, whether it's the second, whether it's the third, whether it's the third or the second. If anything, I think he would come in and say, the first, as an opening statement. Of course, if they would let him go in and talk with them, he will say, and the second, and the third. And in fact, they are one Dharma wheel. So today, we stop here. The Dharma wheel will continue turning. In the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch of the Zen Chan tradition, there was an episode where the Sixth Patriarch, it's said that the Sixth Patriarch was illiterate, but some later evidence suggests that he wasn't, or rather early traditions suggest that he wasn't literally illiterate, but it just means like it's a more exaggerated way of saying that he wasn't scholarly. But anyway, it said that in this sutra, it said that he met a nun who was very devoted to her daily practice as chanting the Lotus Sutra. Lotus Sutra has 28 chapters, a fairly long text, but her practice is to chant the Lotus Sutra. Poetically, you can say, you can describe that as turning the wheel of the Lotus Sutra. So when you engage the Lotus Sutra, when you chant the Lotus Sutra, some people even would do something like in Chinese Buddhism, there's a tradition of chanting the Lotus Sutra with prostrations. So they call this prostrating to the Lotus Sutra, which is every word of the Lotus Sutra. So just start with like the title, you know, Sadharma Pundarika Sutra in Sanskrit. So like the true Dharma White Lotus Sutra. So if you say you want to do this practice this way, it's like the, right? You say the true Dharma of the White Lotus Sutra, right? The, when you say the, get up, do one prostration. True, get up, or not even sitting down. True, one prostration. Dharma, one prostration. White, one prostration. Lotus, one prostration. Sutra, one prostration. The entire volume of the Lotus Sutra, which in English is about this thick. There were many in East Asia that do that kind of practice. So anyway, this woman, it said, she chanted the Lotus Sutra every day, this nun. So the sixth patriarch asked her, what are you chanting? She said, I'm chanting the Lotus Sutra. She said, and the patriarch said, oh, good, very good. Then the sixth patriarch gave her a teaching and said, when you have understanding, when you are awakened, you turn the Lotus Sutra. When deluded, the sutra turns you. So he's playing with the word of turning the Dharma wheel. Turning the Dharma wheel, the word turn, right? Even in Sanskrit also has a negative connotation, which is like you are turned upside down, turned around and around by samsara. Whereas Buddha turns the Dharma wheel, there that connotation of turning is set into motion, and set into motion that will continue without problems. So there, the metaphor of turning is purposeful, positive, but it has a double connotation. So the sixth patriarch used that. When you are deluded, the sutra turns you. When you are awakened, you turn the sutra. So I will apply this to this subject of, the turnings of the Dharma wheel. When you understand, then you can turn the Dharma wheel. First turning, second turning, third turning, fourth turning, fifth turning, sixth turning, whatever. When you are confused, then all the turnings will turn you upside down. Changchu semcho rinpoche ma ge ba nam ge gyurche ge ba nyam pa me pa go ne gong du bel war sho. Tomorrow, the program is 1 hour of guided practice of the Avalokiteshvara practice. Be sure you download that particular sadhana. And most of you probably don't know, but Laura Russell is another person that is, always present for class. Today she's not here because she it's a planned thing. She has surgery at the hospital, and so dedicate merit and that she will recover from the surgery smoothly, well, and join us back in class again. And so you have a good day.
Thank you.
Gracias, hasta luego.